Welcome to the Regulating AI podcast, where we bring different, diverse global voices to set up a fair, responsible AI governance structure around the world. And today we are joined by an amazing Austrian AI expert, Jeannette Gorzala, with us. Jeannette heads AI Act.AI for now, and she's also the vice chair of the advisory board to the Austrian government on AI and also the EU AI Forum, also which supports about 2,500 companies in terms of compliance with AI. Jeannette, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you here in Amsterdam.
Same here. Jeannette, so we have a global audience, European, outside Europe. Just give us a brief to the audience. What does the EU AI Act mean in a very brief way?
Thank you very much for this question. I think it's a very vital one. At this point of time, the AI Act has been passed in summer and will now gradually become into effect until 2027. It actually is of global importance. So for companies developing AI and deploying AI in Europe, but also companies outside of Europe that want to market their products at the European market or where citizens in the EU are exposed to other AI systems. If you want me to explain it in a nutshell, it's basically mandatory responsible AI practices for high impact systems. So systems in the field of HR, education, finance, for example.
So, Jeannette, one of the criticisms of the EU AI Act is that it could end up stifling a little bit of the innovation. What do you say to that?
That is a question I get asked very often. And I think you can boil the AI Act down to simple truths, right? If you build a rocket without safety protocols, it's not the question if, but when it will explode. Same applies if you build the AI without governance. So the AI Act actually is built in the trustworthy AI principles from 2018. So something that has been very long in the market, but they haven't been adhered to. So there was need for action. And actually, the AI Act harmonized the European market because currently you have 27 different legislations. You have uncertainty. That's very bad for business. The AI Act simplifies this as one single rule book for the European market, and companies now plan because they know what they need to do. So actually, I would say something positive for European AI companies. And also looking to the side of innovation, right? I think question zero is what kind of innovation do we want to have? And everyone wants innovation that works, innovation that is technically robust, and of course, respects certain kind of values. So I think it will actually promote responsible innovation. And that is, I think, the innovation everyone wants to experience.
So what you're saying is, now at least there is one AI Act for all the European companies. You deal with a lot of 2,500, so to speak, companies in your association. What suggestions you have, especially for smaller companies, as they are working towards so they can prepare for this AI Act, which will come into play in about a year's time? What would your suggestions be to them?
I think the first step is always the hardest, the important one. I see a lot of fear because the EU AI Act is a little bit over 100 pages, right? And it's a little bit of a complex framework. But you need to start. And I've been working with many startups in the high impact fields. And on our regulatory journey, actually, it determined that there's very little they need to do on top of what they need to do, but there is kind of like a call for action there. So the companies are very diligent, starting is vital, and then working it out along the way, considering this also in your go-to-market strategies. Because investors are asking about AI compliance. Your customers will be asking if you know what you need to do or not to do the AI Act. Here we actually see that companies and startups, especially that are well prepared, have a market advantage because they can demonstrate that their product is not only innovative and a value add, but also is compliant, and here you're effectively managing your risks.
So they should be better prepared, and then it can become a strategic advantage for them. Jeannette, what are your thoughts on global harmonization of AI regulation? I mean, the EU has done its thing. In the US, we have the White House we don't have we have a Bill of Rights, we don't have any legislation, and then China is doing its own thing. In terms of global harmonization, do you think we should have some kind of a global harmonization of rules and regulations?
Definitely. So I've always been a champion of collaboration and building bridges, and of course follow very closely what is happening in the UK, in the US, but also in China. And we must not forget, for example, Africa, right? Because there are many developments down there that are interesting in technology also. We met in Las Vegas, and I think we already shared a lot of conversations there. I think we're all heading in the same direction. All want these technologies to work for all, but we need to come closer together to make it easier, and find maybe global principles, global standards. I think will be very important to make also technology transfer and marketing of applications more successful. But collaborating is definitely the way to go.
Collaborating is definitely a way to go. You raised a point about Africa, and also you're from Austria, which is a small country per se. One of the concerns that I hear, especially from the global south, is that the language, the culture, the traditions might get wiped out because the AI is kind of being built by Silicon Valley, California companies in English. What are your thoughts about how do smaller countries, regions that have had hundreds, thousands of years of cultural and traditions hold on to that?
So we definitely see that these technologies have been basically now been very much driven from the US, with the primary language, of course, in English. So certainly other languages are not as good or not as well represented. So there's definitely need for a diversity from a language point of view, but also from a cultural diversity and geographical point of view. And I think this will be the next step to take also this into account and to make more diverse models that reflect the world more accurate.
Great. Um, Jeanette, in terms of companies and when you set work with them, what basic ethical principles do you think that they should incorporate in their systems when they are building AI systems? What suggestions would you have for that?
I think we all know the primary starting point is data. So I think having good data governance is the first step to take towards having robust and safe AI applications. So really looking at your data. I think the second thing to consider is risk management, depending on your use case, which will also be very important for your company if you're developing this, but also for your clients. And then looking at this not only one point in time, but on a whole life cycle basis. So when I put it into market, but also continuous monitoring, because we know one of the strengths of AI is its possibility to be modified, to adapt, to learn. But this means also we need to stay on top of those developments, adapt and learn as long as we're using those systems.
So adapt, learn from those systems. Jeanette, you have a strong legal background. How is AI changing your profession per se? This is for a lot of the lawyers who listen to our program.
So legal tech is a development I've been following the past years, and AI is now very much disrupting this space and also the legal profession. I might share an anecdote. Actually, a client called me and told me he will not need our services in the future as much as he needed them in the past because ChatGPT can summarize super confidential contracts, can give legal advice. I asked him if he looked at the contractual penalty, which is, I think, 800K for confidentiality breach. So you see, of course, our profession will change and is being disrupted by these technologies, but I think in a positive way, because if we lawyers and law firms learn to use these technologies for administration, for streamlining operations, we can have more time to spend with our clients. And that is actually where the value is, because I believe being a lawyer is kind of like guiding my client through the legal process that is not funny, but bureaucratic and complex. And that's actually the value we can deliver even more if we learn how to use these technologies to do the things that are not fun and purely administrational and don't have any value at all.
So it'll basically allow people to do more high-end work and let some of these other things be taken care of by AI, is what you're saying, right?
Fully agree. Yes.
Awesome. Jeanette, Europe has had incredible talent, AI talent, as you know. I mean, you look at DeepMind and some of these other companies that are there. What do you see the future of AI in Europe? Are you bullish on it, or positive on it, or you worry about it because there have been reports. The former Prime Minister of Italy, Drago, had come up with saying that Europe needs to change to keep innovation going. But what are your thoughts? You work with a lot of AI companies here.
I'm very impressed by European talent and European startups. And I think there is more than we actually know or believe there is. I think our ecosystem needs to develop, get more support, and get more mature because I think they will need infrastructural support because we all know these models need a lot of infrastructure. We need a little bit more mature financing system to give the financial support to those young entrepreneurs. But I'm very, very optimistic about the things we're going to build in Europe. Of course, I also know the Draghi report, which has had a lot of criticism, of course, in the fields of overregulation, in the fields of data regulation. But definitely we need to get better there and we're evolving. So also if we look at the AI Act, it's like the first start of this framework. This will develop as the technology develops, as we develop. Of course, we need to synchronize all the legal regulations we have for data, for AI. This will be one of the challenges we need to tackle and address. But I'm definitely optimistic that we can do it and we will have a positive outcome for the ecosystem.
So you're cautiously optimistic. What you're saying is more investment, more funding is needed, maybe more state support would really help. The startups have tremendous opportunity. Jeanette, we have a large audience in the US listening to this. US is in the middle of elections, so there's not going to be any AI regulation, at least for the near future. And when we talk to members of Congress, they said we're not going to do a one big bang European style legislation. If you were to give advice to some of the lawmakers who listen to this, policymakers, given what you know about the UI Act, you have been very, very familiar. What would be some of the messages that you would give to some of your listeners in the US about the lessons learned and what can you do better in the US for this?
So basically, I think it's about filling the gaps. The EU AI Act is a horizontal legislation, so it goes as a kind of like horizontal on all verticals. I think looking at the gaps you might have in your regulations and filling those gaps with what is actually needed due to the specific characteristics of AI is maybe one good thing. Also, you said there's not going to be one big bang, huge regulation, which actually might even be beneficial because it helps you in speed, right? You can do small chunks prioritized as they are needed for the market, but you can do them quicker. The EU legislation process took roughly something like 5 years, which is fast for this kind of like complexity, but still 5 years is 5 years and technology is ahead of us anyway. So actually the kind of like doing it proportionate and step by step might even kind of like help to address the most critical challenges and moving from there. I think the UI Act has a few good building blocks. And I think looking at the Bill of Rights, for example, and the executive order, so we have common ground there and maybe kind of like working together to expand this common ground to stay in sync and in step lock to make things easy also for companies working in both markets.
So obviously what you're saying is there's some things to be learned, but the US, because the way it is structured, should continue going down the path of innovation that is happening out there. Jeanette, in terms of governance, I mean, you do a lot of working on governance, working with companies. A lot of companies now have set up AI ethics boards. I talk to a lot of chief AI officers who have those. What are your views on should companies have AI ethics boards? And then the other thing is, most of them are internally staffed. Should they be externally staffed, internally staffed? What is your view on that?
I think it's a good start to have AI ethics and trustworthy AI formalized as a part of the organization or as a part of the process. So it could be an ethics board, it could be a chief trust or chief AI officer, someone that is responsible for taking care of that topic. So I think this is very important, very vital, and I hope to see more of those developments along the way. Internal, external, I think it should be a collaboration also because internally, you know, the company, you know, the process, you know, the products. So you have deep insights that maybe help you to bring this topic into the organization deeper and potentially also faster as an outside consultant. But there are, of course, topics where you need a fresh view from the outside, someone unbiased, someone more critical. So, for example, bringing someone in regularly for an audit or just for sparring, for being up to date, I think would also be a good idea. So, just combining those two things along the way.
So combining both those things, Jeanette, you think is a great perspective for you. As companies are marching down this path, one of the big things that the concern that they keep talking about is the return on investment for a lot of these AI investments that are happening. And when I talk to them, they say return on investment, governance, is a big issue, and they're a big concern of them. When you see these AI systems out here, you know, there are concerns about biases that are built into a lot of these systems, and the EU AI Act kind of addresses them. And some of these companies are not implementing external facing systems. Their chatbots are for internal employees. They're not deploying it externally because they are worried about these. What are your thoughts in terms of how do you circumvent these biases or these exposure that these companies have? Because you deal with a lot of these companies. What suggestions would you have to these chief AI officers who are listening right now?
I think the most important step to start is know your bot and kind of like guide the users. Looking at the internal perspective, for example, we see a lot of those bots being used for sparring, for content management, for knowledge management, to help the employees solve simple questions. Here, I think it is important to guide your staff on how to use these bots and how not to use them, because I think we need to be clear that AI kind of like also has limitations or use cases you do not want to have kind of like tested on those things. So I think employee guidance and giving them education on how to work with these bots most efficiently is a step you should take internally. And also, if you do this continuously, you will very, very soon discover if things are not going the way you plan them to do. If you work with external bots, actually the same goes, educating the user in the user policy. Also, maybe, for example, limiting the use of these chatbots, educating the user not to put in using your social security number, bank data, all those sensitive stuff into those bots. But also, you will always find users that love to experiment and might get an output that was not intended by the company. I think this will happen to us and you cannot prevent that. But being as cautious as you can be, but also opening up a little bit this topic, because I think the bots are a first step into experimenting with Gen AI, generating value for internal use and employees and external customers, and then developing along the way.
So, experimenting, but being careful with these bots, but slowly opening them up is the message you are giving to our chief AI officers who are listening. Jeanette, as we are building this regulation in EU and across the board, how important is the public-private partnership in terms of regulation as we keep moving forward?
I think it is key, in particular, if we look at artificial intelligence, because we need the capabilities to understand this tech, how it is developed, how it's trained, how it's deployed. And this is something that, of course, the companies that are doing this and have been doing this for the past years and decades know best. So public-private partnership is very important for the lawmakers, policymakers to understand what is happening, because this is not expertise that is naturally on the policy and lawmaking side. And we're seeing very good examples, in my opinion, actually now, where the codes of practice have been actually kickstarted yesterday. So the European AI Office has set up working groups to work on benchmarking, risk measuring from a technical side, governance, risk governance, copyright and transparency issues, and it's public-private partnerships. So the stakeholders are invited, experts from civil societies, from AI representatives, from deployers of AI models. So it's really a collaborative effort. And I think this is the way to go here because, of course, the people doing this in practice know their problems best. And to learn from that, to understand that, and to wrap the policy and governance layer around this to really address also the risks, I think will be key going forward.
So the involvement of public is pretty important. The public-private partnership, getting civil society and other participants, I think becomes very, very important is what you're saying. Jeannette, the public perception of AI has been, mixed. There's some fear, there's some optimism, etc. What can lawmakers do towards changing some of this perception in your view?
I see the fear, yes. I've been in a panel actually previously, and they compared AI to some sort of magic, right? Because you ask ChatGPT or another tool, and magically your question gets answered very eloquently. So of course, this sparks fear, in particularly on the job side, right? I think what we all can do to tackle that fear and onboard everybody in the society is to work on competence and just kind of like myth busting. So we've seen huge competence offenses, not offenses, but offensives kind of like launched, where you just educate the public about what AI is, so how it works, how kind of like this can influence your private life, and just to educate them on how these tools work. And I think when we learn how these tools work and how we can work with them, this is an important factor to tackle fears, for example, but also kind of like to really, safely work with these tools and do this with caution. Because speed is kind of like not progress. We can do things very fast, but we can break a lot of important things along the way. So also going cautiously with digital transformation and implementing these tools in sensitive areas. But as we go along the way, we will see that fear reduces because people also see the real benefit, for example, in healthcare, in financial services. So there's a lot to be done, but I think we're on a good way here.
So myth busting, education, awareness, I think is very, very key. Jeannette, in terms of an actionable item to leave for our audience before we let you go on to your very, very important other meetings, what would be an actionable item that you would want to leave our audience with?
Take the first step and get started on AI governance if you're a company. If you're a private person, start to familiarize yourself with AI, how it works and how it affects your private life. And I think when we do the first step and we do this collectively, we can really make this technology work for all.
So take the first step if you're a company, if you're an individual, learn about it, and collectively we can move forward. One question I had, you talked about your profession where your client said, I don't need you. There will be many labor changes, I would say, disruptions over the period of time. And I don't know if the UAI Act addresses this, but what are your thoughts? What should regulators, policymakers do in terms of the changes that are coming for something like this?
I think AI is already very much disrupting the workspace. I think we're all seeing that. The difference, if we look to history, is in history we had industrial revolution. It was always blue collar work that got disrupted, that had to adapt, that had to build resilience and to change. I think for the first time in history, it's white collar work, so knowledge workers that have to deal with this kind of like transformation. And it's actually not transformation because it's like a rocket soaring through. It's right now on spot and developing so fast. So I think this is something that is a challenge also for societies and for our governments, because when this technology progresses and of course the adoption rate goes up, we will see a lot of, yes, need for upskilling, need for reskilling, need for transformation, for knowledge and white collar workers that have not been used to this, kind of like really, really fast accelerated path as other fields have been in the past. And I think it will be one of the core challenges to to deal with this, because a lot will be, I think, more efficient. Some tasks we will not have more in the future, which will free up some time for really high value work. But still, we need to find a mechanism to sort this all out, to sort our societies out, to set us up for the future, because this is something, this is bigger than kind of like just using an AI system in HR. It targets our global population. And I think every government will be confronted by this in some point of time.
So what you're saying is it's like a rocket ship, and this is going to first time it's addressing or coming at white collar workers, unlike before, and we need to confront it. Does government or policymakers have a role in this?
Definitely. I think it's one of the core tasks of governments to think about the societal pacts for the future. How will pensions work? How do we deal with people that are unemployed? How do we distribute our wealth and value? How does taxation work? I think this will be very, very difficult topics as we see kind of like what they're targeting, right? But I think it will be very important to sort this out, because we see this massive shift in society, and also kind of like on the company side with the huge players developing these technologies and their impact.
No, so very important points you made. It's the government has a big role. You said pensions, and earlier you said about reskilling, upskilling. So those things become very, very important. Jeannette, thank you so much. Your knowledge of the EU AI Act, for the legal profession, for bringing us this valuable perspective globally to give some perspective to the American audience and the rest of the world, and tackling a lot of other topics that I threw at you is really, really appreciated. And to all our listeners, please keep listening, because you get to listen to amazing folks like Jeannette, so that we can create fair, responsible AI regulation around the world that is democratic, but also promotes innovation in a responsible way. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to reconnect with you here in Amsterdam, and I hope to stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.